Well, hello everyone, Trader Jay here. Today we are going to go through a quick tutorial on how to use NinjaTrader's strategy builder to create an automated trading strategy. So it's something that quite a few people have asked me about. How can I automate my trades? One of the great tools that NinjaTrader provides is the strategy builder, which allows you to create basically a strategy that you can automate during your trading day. So let's walk through this as part one. We'll go through the basics of how to use Strategy Builder to create an automated trading strategy and how we can enable it on our chart. Part two, we'll walk through how do we backtest that using the Strategy Analyzer. But first and foremost, let's focus on the Strategy Builder. So as you can see, I already have a chart loaded with the ES in the background and the control panel in the front. You can see I just have a demo account, a simulation account with about $20,000 in it that we'll use for testing purposes. So the first thing that we're going to do from the control panel is click New. And if you come all the way down here to the bottom, you'll see Strategy Builder. There's also the Strategy Analyzer, which we'll get to in part two. So we're going to click on Strategy Builder. And that should open up, and here we go. So for simplicity's sake, let's build a strategy that says every time the MACD crosses over the average, we're going to enter into a long or a short position. Now, I'm only using this as an example of how to build a strategy, not necessarily building a successful strategy, but that's also where we can utilize the strategy analyzer to see how successful will our strategy be when we build it out. So here we have the strategy builder. You can see several different steps that we're going to go through. But first, we're going to start with a new strategy. Now, if you click this drop down, you'll see any strategies that you have already built or that might have already come pre-configured. You can see quite a few different ones that I've done for testing purposes. I've made some other videos. But for today's sake, we're going to start with a new strategy. If you wanted to take one of the strategies that you've already built or was already provided, you can just hover over it, and over here on the side, you'll see Save As. You could click Save As. It will basically make a copy of that strategy that you can use as a template and modify it. But since we're going to start with something from scratch, we will just select New Strategy, and we'll click Next. So here we want to give this strategy a name. And so let's just call this, we will call it Strategy Builder MACD Crossover. And let's give it a description. We will say, enter a trade when MACD crosses above or below the average. So this just gives us an idea of what we're building and what it's supposed to do. Now, again, this is not necessarily a successful strategy. I'm just using this as a simple idea of how you can build a strategy. And in part two, we'll go into analyzing that strategy and back testing it over a period of time to see how successful would we have been. So the next thing, we'll click Next. And under default properties, we want to select on bar close. My strategies that I build, I always look at when the last bar closes before I make a decision. How many times have you seen a candlestick shoot way up? It looks like this huge breakout only to be rejected, and it comes way back down. Now, if you were to calculate that on each tick or each price change, there's a very good chance that you would enter into a trade at a position that you don't necessarily want. Now, that could work in your favor. It could work against you. In my experience, it typically works against you. You have to be calculated. I don't want to make a joke here, but calculated on where you make your entry. And typically speaking, on bar close is where you're going to have the greatest success because that's more indicative of what is actually happening. We're not going to get into the more properties. We can expand that, and there's a few different things that you can select in here, like fill limit orders on Chutch. We'll go ahead and select that one actually, because that's something that I always put into place. And let's just leave it at that. So more properties, there's some more complex settings that you can choose in there to set as defaults. That's the only one that I'm going to choose. The difference between setting it to fill orders on touch versus leaving that unchecked is what you're doing is you're telling NinjaTrader, I want to fill this order as soon as it touches whatever criteria fits, and not to wait until it goes past. So for example, if I had a profit target or a stop loss set at, in this case, let's see right here, 41.47. If I had a profit target there and my candlestick reached up and it hit 41.47, I'm telling NinjaTrader I want it to fill that order as soon as it hits 41.47, not wait for it to get to 41.47.25, for example. Don't wait until it gets past it to fill that order. I want it filled right then and there. So it will do its best to attempt to fill that order. So we're just going to click next. And we're not going to worry about the additional data. We're not going to worry about placing this on a specific instrument. We're not going to get into custom series. We can follow that into a different video that, again, more complex setups, more options. We're going to stick with the basics today. So just click next. And now we're going to start getting into some of the configuration. So in order for us to fine tune our strategy analyzer and back testing, there's a few things that we really want to put in there. We need some inputs or variables so that we can alter it and get the greatest level of success. So the three things that we're going to input is we're going to input a profit target, we're going to input a stop loss, and we're also going to input the number of contracts that we trade. So the first thing we're going to do under inputs is we're going to select add. Now let's start with our profit target. And for the name of this input, we're just going to call it profit. Now, when we do futures, what we want to look at is the number of ticks. Each point is comprised of 4 ticks. So when we start to create an input called profit, we want to look at the number of ticks that we're expecting to get of profit. And in this case, let's say in our strategy, we want our risk to reward ratio to be 2-to-1. And if we had a stop loss of 4 ticks, then that means our profit we would want at 8 ticks. So we're going to select for type as integer because we're looking at a number, a fixed number of ticks. So in this case, our default is going to be 8. 8 ticks is the profit that we are looking to get. Now, minimum is 1, and all that means is in the process of doing some back testing and analyzing, the minimum that we would ever want it to be is 1. Maximum can be whatever we choose, but the default is going to be 8 in our strategy. The minimum would be 1. And for description, we're going to set, we're just going to give this as a description of profit target. Hit OK, and now you can see we have an input profit. It's an integer type. Default is going to be 8, and we'll get into how do we apply this later. Minimum will be 1 in the description of profit target. So the next two things that we wanted to set were a stop loss and a number of contracts. So we'll click add again. And for the name, we'll do stop for our stop loss. And again, we're looking at the number of ticks that we're going to go for. And again, we want that to be int for integer. Now the default, we said we were going to do a 1-to-2 risk to reward. So our default is going to be 4 ticks, which is half of what our profit is. And there's that ratio of 1-to-2 for our risk to reward. So 4, well, again, we'll leave the minimum at 1. That way we can always adjust it down if we wanted to. But let's be realistic. If your stop loss is at 1 tick, more often than not, you're going to get stopped out. You need to give yourself a little bit of room for your trade to happen. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to leave the default at 4, minimum at 1, and for description, stop loss. And we'll click OK. And here we see it here, stop, integer, 4, 1, stop loss. Now the last one that we're going to add is contracts. And this is going to be the number of contracts that we're going to trade as the default for our strategy. Now in this case, again, we're looking at the number of contracts. So again, this will be an integer value. So we'll leave it at int. Default will be 1, minimum is 1. Number of contracts to trade. That's going to be our description. So we understand what these inputs are for. So by default, we'll trade 1 contract. Obviously, the minimum is 1. You can't have a 0 because you can't trade 0 contracts. And we can always increase the number of contracts that we're going to trade. So we'll click OK. Now, in this case, very simple strategy that we're putting together. We don't need any variables. So we'll just leave that blank. And we'll stick with the 3 inputs that we have, and I'll show you very shortly how do we implement those. So we'll click next. And now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of the strategy builder, the conditions and actions. Your conditions section are defining when I'm going to enter a trade or when I am going to do something. So in this case, what we were talking about is the MACD crossing over the average. So when we look at the MACD indicator, which I have right here below the chart, anytime the MACD, which is the green line, crosses over the average, which is the red line, we would want to enter a long position. So here's a better idea. So right here, you can see the MACD crosses over, a nice strong crossover. We would want to enter a long position here. Over here, you can see the MACD crossing below. And per our strategy, we would enter a short position here. So that's the concept of what we're going to do for this very, very simplified strategy. Again, this does not necessarily mean it's going to be a successful strategy, but it's just an example of how do we put something together. So in this case, we're going to start with the conditions. When do we look to do something? So the first thing we're going to do is add. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at is creating the opportunity to enter a long position. And since we're talking about the MACD crossing above the average, we're going to look at the indicators because MACD is an indicator for us. So we double click there and it opens up all the different indicators that we can choose from. And we want to go down to MACD. We're going to leave the input series. Bars is 0. So input series we'll leave at the default. Bars ago is 0. We want to look at the most recent bar. We're not going to worry about plotting it on the chart. I already have my MACD indicator down here below. I don't need additional drawings clogging up my chart. I like to keep my chart very clean. If you would like to see it on the chart, you can click this box and it will show you on the chart when it enters. For me, I don't need that. I can look down below and it keeps my actual chart much cleaner. We're not going to worry about offset or any of that. Parameters, I'm going to leave these at the default parameters for the MACD. If you are running off of different parameters in your MACD indicator, you're probably going to want to update these parameters here in your strategy to match whatever parameters you are using in your indicator. So if we scroll down under plots, here's the first thing that we're going to notice. By default, it's looking at the average, but we want to look at the MACD. So we're going to change this to the MACD. So we're looking here, again, these colors are all customizable. You can change them to whatever. These do not matter unless you're selecting plot on chart. Then it will show up on your main chart using these colors for the MACD, the average, and the diff. But for now, we're just going to leave this alone. And here are our standards. So we're looking for the MACD at this point. And what are we looking for it to do? Well, we don't want it to equal. We want it to cross above. So you can see the different options. These all play a different role depending on what you're trying to do. In this case, we're looking for the MACD to cross above. In the look back period, we're going to leave it at 0. We don't want to look at one bar back. We want to look at the most recent bar. So in this case, 0 bars back is our look back period. And what did we say? We wanted to cross above the average. So again, we're going to look at this indicator. We double click there and we scroll down to MACD again. We'll leave all of these as default. And as you notice, most of them are grayed out. We could still select plot on chart, but no need to do that. Leave your parameters at the default or whatever you have your MACD indicator set at. And here you can see the 12, 26, and 9, 12, 26, and 9. And as we scroll down under plots, we see average. So here you can make that comparison. We are looking for the MACD to cross above the average, and we'll hit OK. Now here we can see cross above MACD above the average, and that's the only condition that we're looking for. Now, the next piece would be, what do we do when that condition is met? And in this case, we only have one condition. We can add more. And in this video, we'll go back after we've created this, and I'm going to add another condition to help fine-tune when this would happen. Again, that doesn't mean it's going to be successful. It's just showing you how you can change your strategy. So in this case, we want to do the following. What do we want to do when the MACD crosses above the average? We want to enter into a long position. So in this case, under set 1, do the following. We're going to click add. And in this case, we're going to do order management because we want to enter an order, enter a trade. So we're going to double click order management and select enter a long position. Now quantity, if you recall over here when we did inputs and variables, we created an input called contracts. So for quantity, instead of default, we're going to click this little set. And if you click set, you've got indicator, price, strategy, miscellaneous, and user input. In this case, it's an input that we created. It's a user input. And if I double click that, you'll see the three inputs that we previously created: profit, stop, and contracts. In this case, we're going to select contracts because we're saying I want to enter into a long position using the number of contracts that I have defined in my input. We'll select the OK. And there we go. Do the following: enter long contracts, and it will be whatever number we provide. And I'll show you how to do that here shortly. So the other thing we want to do is the opposite direction. When the MACD crosses below, we want to enter into a short position. So we'll just click this little plus right there to create another set of conditions and actions. So again, up here in the conditions, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to click add indicator. We're going to select the MACD. We scroll down, and again, it defaults to average. We're going to select MACD. Everything else we're leaving at default. Now in this case, we want to enter a short position. So instead of crossing above, we're going to select cross below. Look back period again is going to be 0 because I want to look at only the most recent bar. Now again, we're going to cross below the average. So we select the indicator again. We're going to select MACD. Scroll all the way down, leave all of these as default, make sure that it's set to average, and we hit OK. So again, now we're looking for the crossing below the MACD from the average. Now what are we going to do? We want to enter into a short position with this strategy. So we'll click add order management because we're entering a position, but in this case, instead of long, we want to enter a short position. So we select short position. Under quantity, again, we're going to select contracts. So we're going to click on the set button here, select user input, and select our contracts. OK, and we'll select OK. No need to enter a signal name here. That's for a different setup. Again, we're keeping this very, very simple. So now here under set 2, we have cross below the MACD across the average. We're going to enter into a short position with the number of contracts that we define with our input. And we'll click next. So here we go with our stop loss and our targets. So let's add in our profit target. So here we're going to click the add button, and we want to add in a profit target. Now, again, if you recall, what we want to do is look for the number of ticks of profit. So for mode, instead of currency, we're going to select ticks. Because with our futures, we're looking for the number of ticks of profit that we want to get. We're not looking for a dollar value or anything like that, just the number of ticks. So we're going to select the mode as ticks. Now value, again, we're going to select this little set when we hover over it. And if you recall, we created an input for our target, our profit target. So under user input, we're going to select profit and hit OK. And that's it for the profit target. We'll hit OK. So now you can see here, we have set a profit target. Calculation is going to be ticks defined by the profit input that we have created. And again, we'll get into how do we change that later. But if you recall, by default, we had profit set at 8 ticks. And then the other thing we need to add in is a stop loss. So again, we'll click add, and we're going to select stop loss. And again, mode, we want that to be set at ticks. Again, we want to have a 1 to 2 risk to reward ratio for this strategy based on the number of ticks. And for value, again, we're going to click that set, select the user input, and select stop. That is the input that we created for our stop loss. And we hit OK and OK. So now we have 2 different parameters set, one for the profit target and one for the stop loss. Again, the values are going to be defined by the inputs that we created. For our profit target, we had a default integer value of 8, meaning we're going to look for 8 ticks of profit. And we created a stop loss based on the number of ticks. And in our case, our default was 4 ticks for the stop loss. So a 1 to 2 risk to reward ratio. And click Now, if we click next, it just takes us to the finish dialog. If we were to click the finish button, what we would see is it will compile this, it'll create our strategy, and then we can apply it, and it will close out the strategy builder. But we're going to come back to this. So instead of clicking finish, I'm just going to click this compile button. So it's going to compile this into code, load it into our strategies that we can apply. So we'll click compile here and wait for a second. This should go pretty quickly, and there we go. Strategy generated successfully. So we're going to click OK. Now, if we come over here to our chart, you see I've got a chart loaded. I don't even have an account here, so let's select Sim 101. We'll just use this one. And if you come up here to the top, you'll see this little icon here, which is strategies. So if we click on strategies, and we called this one the Strategy Builder MACD crossover. So we're going to select that one and click add. Now we see it down here, and you can see the defaults, this 1, 8, and 4. Those are based off of these parameters that we created, profit, stop, and contracts. 1 contract, 8 ticks of profit, 4 ticks for stop loss. So over here, we can fine tune this before we activate it. So right now, by default, we have 8 ticks of profit, a 4 tick stop loss, and a 1 contract that we're going to enter into the trade. For the input series, by default, it's going to show up with whatever series that you're looking at on your chart. If I had other things available, I could click this drop down and select it. In this case, we're just going to put in the ES, the June 2023 expiration. And we're looking at the 1 minute chart. So for account, we're going to select a demo. And actually, I'll have to change that over here because it's not allowing me to select the sim account. And again, by default, on bar close, so that's correct. Maximum bars to look back, 256 bars. That's for looking back over things, not too crazy necessary. Bars required to trade, 20. All that means is you need to have at least 20 bars on your chart before it's going to even start to calculate. Start behavior, wait until flat. What that means is if you have active trades and you enable this strategy, it won't start trading until you've flattened out and don't have any active trades. So we want to wait until flat. We could do immediately submit, but for my purposes, we're going to leave it until flat. I don't want to mix up different trading strategies that I have going on my chart. Now, enabled, we're going to leave that unchecked for now, just for the purposes of I don't want to enable it until we've gone through everything. So if we scroll down, you'll see order fill resolution. We want to leave that at fastest. And if you recall, I set that as this fill limit orders on touch. And so that's checked. Slippage, we're going to leave it 0. By default, I don't want to have any slippage. So this will help minimize any slippage that we're looking for. Entries per direction, 1. So I'm going to allow this to go up to 2 in this case. Now what that means is if the MACD crossed above, for example, and we enter into a long position, but I don't fill my profit target and it slips back down below, and then it comes without stopping out, and then it goes back above, this will allow me to enter into a second position for a second trade. Now I could make this 3, 4, 5, 10 if I wanted to. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at 2. This gives me a second opportunity to make a profit. Entry handling, we'll leave that at all entries. Exit on session close is checked. All that means is the end of the trading session, the end of the day when the markets close, if you still have an open order, it's going to close that out. And that prevents you from getting into a situation where you are holding on to a contract, and instead of intraday trading, now you're intraday trading, and you're going to be required to carry the full margin for that contract. So we want to close that position out at session close. We don't get liquidated because we don't have enough funds in our account to carry that full margin instead of the intraday margin. Stop and target submission per entry, leave it at that. Set order quantity, we're going to leave that with our strategy, and time in force, good till close. So we'll just leave that, and then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and enable this. So click enable and apply. And you'll see some things just popped up on the chart. So we'll click OK. Now, if we take a look at this chart, what you're going to see is what would have happened had this been live trading. So it goes back across those 256 bars, if you recall, and it starts looking at every time that the MACD crossed over. So let's just start right here. You can see the MACD crossed below right here. So at the end of this bar, it calculated that the MACD crossed below the average, and on the opening of the next bar, it entered into a short position. So it entered into a short position here at 41.4275. And as you can see, it did not continue to go down to make my 8 ticks of profit that I was looking for. And instead, it reversed on me, and I got stopped out at 4 ticks for my stop loss. So you can see the sell short, 1 contract at the price point, and then I got my stop loss, 1 contract at that 4 tick loss. And you can see it stopped me out. Now, again, here we had the MACD cross above. And then, so right here, at the end of this candlestick, it crossed above. Now, that means I was supposed to enter into a long position. And at the opening of this candlestick, you see it entered a long position here. And again, I got stopped out. It went the exact opposite direction. Now, granted, I'm looking at pre-market conditions here at, I don't know, what time was this? That was almost 5 a.m. Pacific time. Not a lot going on at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'm not surprised that I got stopped out. But here we see we crossed below on this candlestick here, and we entered into a short position, and look at what happened. Boom, I hit my profit target. So there's that 1 to 2 ratio, right? I got stopped out here, I got stopped out here. That was minus 8 ticks of profit. And then this third entry, I hit my profit target. So I essentially hit -4, -4, and then a +8. I just zeroed out. With a 33% success rate on this strategy, I made I broke even. Now, again, here's the next one. We see this very strong crossover of the MACD here at a little past 5 a.m. And we entered into a long position, and look at that. There's my 8 ticks of profit. So now, after those 4 trades, I was at 50%. And I have now 8 ticks of profit based on this strategy. And then you can just kind of follow it through. Looks like I entered another trade here, or I would have, and I would have gotten stopped out. We crossed above, entered another trade, I would have gotten stopped out. Crossed below, entered another trade here, and I made it. So you can see how it goes back and forth. Again, this is not necessarily a strategy which is going to be successful for you. It's just an example of how to create a strategy. And if we scroll through here, we'll just see entry after entry after entry. And to be honest, this is not a very successful strategy with the profit and stop loss that I put in. And you'll probably see a greater percentage of trades being stopped out than being successful. So you can do the math, fill this out, see how it would have played out. In part 2, we'll get into the strategy analyzer and show how we could make this an even better and more successful strategy. Or we can come to the conclusion that this just is not a good strategy, or it's a fantastic strategy. Again, we'll get into that in part 2. Now, what we want to do, let's go back to our strategy and we'll fine tune it a little bit. So we open up our strategy builder again, and we're still in that same strategy. But let's go back to our conditions and actions. Now, instead of every time the MACD crosses over, let's fine tune this and say, we only want to enter into a long trade when the MACD is positive. And let's say we want it to be over positive 0.25. So when the MACD is already positive 0.25 or greater, and it crosses above the average, then we want to enter into a long. So again, we can create as many conditions as we want. So here we are, set 1, we're entering long. Let's add another condition here. So in this case, we're going to look at the indicator. We want to select MACD. Again, 0 bars ago, we want to look at the most recent bar. And I want to select MACD. And we want to, this time we're not going to look at the other portion of the indicator, we're going to look at the value of it. So in this case, we want to do greater. So I want to look at when the MACD is greater than positive 0.25. So in this case, under miscellaneous, we can scroll down and numeric value. So in this case, we want to look at when the MACD is greater than 0.25. And we'll select OK. So now it needs to meet all of these conditions. So in this case, we have it selected if all, which means I have to meet all of these conditions before I'm going to enter into a long position. Now, if I selected if any, well, essentially that would enter into a enter into a long position anytime either one of those conditions were met. So I want them to be all. I'm looking for confluence of conditions, not just one. Now, similarly, if we're going to go below, let's add in another condition, and we want to say anytime the MACD, again, we'll select indicators, MACD, scroll down, we're going to select the MACD. We want it to be less than. I'm not looking for less than or equal. I want it to be less than negative 0.25. I don't like to utilize the MACD indicator when it's in that range right around 0. Nothing below 0.25 or above negative 0.25 when I'm going short or long. And again, we're going to select miscellaneous. We scroll down, select numeric value. And in this case, we're going to negative 0.25. Okay, I didn't take my negative. There we go. Negative 0.25. So again, here we can see we want to look at when the MACD is less than negative 0.25, we'll enter into a short. So we don't need to go back through everything. We just added a couple of conditions, and let's compile this. And there we go, strategy generated successfully. So let's go back to our chart. You can see nothing changed here. That's because we already have an active strategy. So we've made a change to the conditions. We need to go back into our strategy. So we can click that little icon, come back over here. For me, I like to just start from scratch. So I'm just going to disable this, hit apply. I'm actually just going to remove this all the way from the chart and click apply, because I want to make sure any changes that I created are being captured. And so we'll select, now that I've removed it from the chart, you can see all those indicators removed. We're going to select the Strategy Builder MACD crossover and click add. Again, all of my defaults are set the same. We'll apply it to this demo account, scroll down, make sure all of this is still the same. Let's go to 2 entries per direction, as I stated before, and then we'll click enabled and we'll hit apply and okay. Now you can see there's a lot less entries now, and that's because we fine-tuned the conditions, the criteria under which we're going to enter a trade. So here you can see that the MACD crossed below, but if you see this over here, when it crossed below, we were at positive 0.68, and our condition was that it needed to be below negative 0.25 to enter a short position. So you can see now it didn't enter into a short position when it crossed over like we did previously. But again, here we did a cross above, and as you can see, it entered into a long position. But in this case, it didn't hit that 8 ticks of profit, and it turned around and we got stopped out. And we see another instance right here that it actually crossed above, which is odd right there. But what happened? We were at negative 0.38 when it crossed above right here. So it didn't enter. And then it crossed below here, and we entered into a short position and got stopped out, unfortunately. Came all the way up and just hit our stop loss. Now, had this not hit our stop loss, we would have gotten profitable over in this area. It happens. So we lost 1, we lost 2, and now we did another cross below, and you can see this entry, and we got our profit target. So 2 losses, 1 win, those just zeroed out. So again, you can see how these strategies play out and how a positive risk to reward ratio is definitely in your benefit. Now, creating a successful strategy is not just about putting in a 1-to-2 risk to reward ratio. You need to find a strategy that works for your your risk tolerance and create something that has a high success rate or a high enough success rate that works in your favor and that you can turn a profit. Now, there are plenty of strategies out there that will have 95 to 98, 99% success rate. But if your profit target is 1 tick and your stop loss is 20 ticks, well, you can do the math. You would have to have essentially 21 successful trades for every one loss in order to even basically break even, to be honest with you, because once you add in the commissions, it's a lot. So just having a high success rate in your strategy does not mean you are profitable. And that's where risk management comes in and having a positive risk to reward ratio. So I hope you found this exciting like I did. I hope you found it useful. I love creating strategies and testing them out, especially when I'm fairly busy and I know I have a strategy that works with the way that the market is moving on that day. I can just turn my strategy on and let it run. And when the market starts to change and it's no longer working with a strategy that I created, I can just turn it off. Now, I'm not suggesting that you just turn a strategy on, walk away. That's a great way to lose your money because the market does change. It shifts, and your strategies will only work when the market is working with your strategy. And that's up to you to understand what is working and what's not. So again, Trader Jay here, trying to give you a quick part 1 tutorial on how to create an automated trading strategy. I hope you found this beneficial. Again, I'm not a licensed broker. I'm not a professional trader, just here to give you a little bit of education on how you can use the NinjaTrader strategy builder to create an automated trading strategy. Again, positive risk to reward ratio, always use good risk management. It's one thing to make money, it's another thing to keep it. And again, what might work for me might not work for you. Previous success is not an indicator of future success, so please keep that in mind. We all see things differently, and be aware of how the market is reacting to you during your trading day. So again, hope you found this useful. Hit that like and subscribe button below. Look forward to seeing you. I'm also working with From the Bottom Trading Group. You can find them on YouTube and Instagram, and my lights just turned off. You've got to love motion sensors on lights. So now you see I'm not a professional at creating these videos either. So enjoy your day, safe trading. Please always run a stop loss, and I look forward to seeing some successful trades in the future. Look for part 2 on how to use the strategy analyzer to check on how successful your strategy would be. Safe trading, my friends.